Hi, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Now, what I have here are two photo albums, or scrapbooks, if you like, that I actually kept myself. I had these stored away for a while, and over the decades, I'd completely forgotten what was inside these. But if you've watched my recent scrapbook videos where I found a big giant Beatles scrapbook at a flea market, it suddenly made me realize I have these and I could actually show these. And I had always meant to do that at some point, but just never wanted to dig them out. Well, now I have the incentive to do so. And I'm going to start with this one. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you watched my scrapbook videos, and please do, just do a search where it's a four-part series called Unique Beatles Scrapbook, parts 1 to 4. That person's scrapbook ended in 1978, around there. What's amazing to me is that it's almost meant to be that these two scrapbooks feature 1979 and 1980 material. All right, so let's go here. Now, this is a People magazine article about the possible reunion. This is going back to the 70s. I don't know how I managed to have this. This was also featured in my scrapbook video. Lennon is playing Daddy, but colored him available. Then it says here, I've always felt that splitting up was a mistake in many ways, John Lennon has said, and he believes the Beatles revival, quote, would undoubtedly produce some great music. The rift with the McCartneys has mellowed, and even John's wife, Yoko, who thinks society blames her for the breakup, is said to favor a reunion. But for now, after 3 LPs released during 74-75, Lennon, 34, has awarded himself a year-long sabbatical, etc., etc. Anyway, this is a little older than most of this material inside this photo album. And this was another one. Reunion is out if it clips Paul's wings. Paul's take on this. If God, saying might go, had meant the Beatles to fly again, wouldn't he have given them wings? To the contrary, Paul McCartney, of course, has wings, and with wife Linda flapping along, the group's soaring success is an obstacle to any Beatles reunion. Now, if you watch the other scrapbook video that I got at the flea market, those clippings were kind of glued in, pasted in. For these, I just had a regular clear, old-fashioned photo album. What's interesting is, if you look, these were self-sticking pages, and over the decades, the glue no longer sticks. So these are just hanging out in there by the clear sheets, which in a way is a good thing because, quite frankly, you wouldn't want too much of the glue to go in and ruin the article over the years. So the Beatles after 14 get back. And, it talks again about, you can read some of this if you want to pause it. The latest rumor of a Beatles reunion filled the second-floor ballrooms of the Statler Hilton in Manhattan last weekend with thousands of the group's fans, many of them as young or younger now than the original screaming mobs of 64, gathered for Beatle Fest 78. The rumor centers on Ringo's first TV special scheduled for broadcast April 26th on NBC. George is already signed to narrate and perform on the show, Ringo's show. Now, it just amazes me. It says here, many of the fans are younger than when the Beatles did their thing. That's exactly the same now in the 21st century when you go to Beatle Fest. Many of them weren't even born then. So nothing's changed. The Beatles rule forever. Car racing gets ex-Beatle George singing again. There's George with a collection of guitars. And here's a nice picture of George showing his 8-month-old son Danny around his sound studio. Names in the news. Now, during this period, John and Yoko were not making music, and John was in, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't want to say hiding, but people wanted to know if he would ever come out and record again. We were hoping he'd make a record. John Lennon and Yoko Ono in a full-page love letter to people who ask us what, when, and why. The rather diffuse communication ran in the Sunday Times at a cost of $20,000. Some sample sentences, quote, "As the good book says, where two are gathered together, it's true, two is plenty, a nuclear seed." The house is getting very comfortable now. Sean, their 3.5-year-old son, is beautiful. The plants are growing, the cats are purring. I remember during this period, we were all so excited. When is John going to come out and, record again? Will he ever record again? And that's what was going on at this point. Beatle boom goes on. This is, do I have a year here? I don't have a year here. I think it's 79 again. Beatle boom goes on. 15 years after they were introduced to America on the Ed Sullivan Show, 10 years after they last entered a recording studio together, the Beatles are still big business. Their label, Capitol Records, reports that the group's records still sell millions of copies a year. Beatlemania, a stage show using Beatle look and sound alikes, is doing well on Broadway, and Beatle memorabilia is highly prized by collectors and commands impressive prices. Nothing has changed in the last 40 years, 79 to 2019, and I'm proud of that. Look at this guy. "This is weird. I feel really old," said fan Walter Winnick. Winnick is 23. At the Beatle Fest, devotees of the four Liverpudlians could buy anything from buttons to trading cards to records to movies, all at impressive prices. A copy of the rare Yesterday and Today album with the rare cover showing the Beatles holding what appear to be dead babies can fetch $250, 50 times what it costs new. So you can see, it's why people say to me, the Beatles are so passé. The Beatles are always going to be talked about. Okay. This is when Back to the Egg came out. Back to the Egg is one of my all-time favorite Paul McCartney albums. Maybe one of my favorite, maybe the favorite Wings album for me. But anyway, it didn't do so well. Boing, the new Wings album comes out this week. So let's all hail the perpetually silly Paul McCartney and his even sillier wife. You can read some of that yourself if you want. Let's pause it. But it's so, it's so negative, the stuff they say about him. I mean, it really is. It says about Old Siam, Sir. Paul McCartney's titles are forever ridiculous. It's like, just let him up, As for the rest of Back to the Egg, it is a triumph of the technological over the human. McCartney's abilities as a producer here with Chris Thomas, who also had a hand in the latest Tom Robinson LP, can't be rivaled. Well, this is a pretty good review. McCartney arranges each song as if it were a visual production, and this visual musical style has reached its zenith in Back to the Egg. There are endless bridges, segues, and transitions in every Wings track, which parallel jump cuts in a car chase or flashbacks or dream sequences. Okay. Here's the continuation. Wings, soft-boiled but cooking. Well, guess what? For the first time, Linda's backup vocals and organ diddling neither irritate the listener nor disturb what McCartney's trying to do. By now, it has become commonplace to criticize Linda's presence in the band, and frankly, I'm getting sick and tired of hearing Linda be put down for her self-indulgence. I wonder if any Mrs. Paul McCartney would have exercised restraint and interfering with his career. Given the chance, I certainly would be up there tooting my kazoo. So, what else we got here? What troubles me most about Back to the Egg is McCartney's dual function as producer-performer. He has the makings of a Phil Spector for sure. His passionate and intellectually correct approach to musical production that has nothing to do with the supposed commitment of the performer to deliver the goods with a maximum of sincerity and a minimum of self-consciousness. Back to the Egg is so cosmetically perfect a production, did I find McCartney's excellence distracting in his performance, which is sexless, dispassionate, theatrical, as myth-hungry, and pretentious as, say, Queen. There you go for you Queen fans. His vocals used to come easy, now they are strained towards some unknown height. Back to the Egg is thoroughly saturated with style, inundated with tricks, but McCartney cannot yet discriminate as to what picture should stay in the mind's eye and what should be left out. He thinks every musical snapshot is a gem. He may be a lover, but he ain't no director. Nonetheless, 1/4 of the Beatles is better than 1,000 showings of Beatlemania. Side 1 of Back to the Egg is worth the price of admission, and there's only one ho-hum selection on the entire record. The single, Getting Closer, is the usual wimpy, acutely cute McCartney ditty, but will probably dominate the singles charts before long. Good, because I can't remember a single note. Well, anyway, see the page, this clear part comes out. Now here we go. Yeah. 3 Beatles play together. Looking for the date, don't have it, but this is when George, John, and Ringo, joined by Clapton and Wings guitarist Denny Laine, played to a secret audience of 200. It wasn't John, was it? Wasn't it Paul? Talking about Eric Clapton. No, the one it says here, the only one not at the bash in England was John Lennon, who lives in New York. The gathering was the closest to the much-touted reunion of the Fabulous Four since they broke up. Sorry, my hand is in the way, folks. Held at Clapton's country home, 25 miles from London. The singers performed on a makeshift outdoor stage in the heavily wooded grounds. About this time, Beatlemania was pretty big, and there's some of the Beatlemania guys, and the original lineup, Joe Pecorino. Mitch Weissman really looks good as Paul. And Leslie Fratkin makes a pretty good George there on the side view. Now this, I have the actual newspaper, this, in my closet. I mean, I have the actual New York Post, where it says, this is the front page, the Beatles are back, exclusive, Fab Four reunited for big UN concert in New York. The date is Friday, September 21st, 1979. I'll never forget, I was taking driver's education in high school at this time. I was learning how to drive, and I remember that the news came on the radio while I was in the driver's car, and I was like, for a split second, I couldn't believe it. I almost crashed the car. And it really looked like the Beatles were going to get back together. I mean, Beatle fever sweeping the world, September 22nd, 1979. The Beatles are back. Beatlemania invaded the UN yesterday as hundreds of calls poured in from all over the world after an exclusive Post report that the Fabulous Four would be reunited this fall at a benefit concert for the Vietnamese boat people. By the way, this was all nonsense. None of the Beatles agreed to this, but they ballyhooed as if it was a done deal. Members of the news media asked for information, fans asked for tickets, and some people just called to express their thanks for bringing George Harrison, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and John Lennon back together again for the first time in 9 years. The phone hasn't stopped ringing all day, said a harried secretary in the UN press office. The calls came in from Canada, London, Australia, Tokyo, and all over the U.S. The final plans for the concert, which is expected to take place in Geneva, Switzerland, could be completed as early as Tuesday, one source told the Post. The final snag involves Lennon, who insists that he has retired as a performer. And it's like, since Lennon will apparently not sing out, the other 3 Beatles are expected to perform as individuals rather than as a group, the source told the Post. This is nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense. Look at this. John Lennon, it's up to him. Amazing. It's so great as history, even bogus history. And then I remember this came out. Lennon to meet UN chief over Beatle reunion. Paul never looked so good, but he rules out Beatles reunion. Okay, so here's an article of Paul ruling out a Beatles reunion, and this one supposedly says Lennon's going to meet the UN chief over a Beatle reunion. So what does it say here? John Lennon will hold talks with UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim within the next few days to try to work out a Beatles reunion. I'm still hopeful we can pull it off, said TV movie producer Dirk Summers. John's heart is in it. Look at this. John's wife, Yoko Ono, said to have been instrumental in the Beatles' breakup a decade ago, is now at the center of negotiations to bring the fabulous four together. She's important because of the strong role she plays in John's life. They're into role reversal. He takes care of the house and the child. She takes care of business. So, amazing. Okay, now this is a infamous Rolling Stone review for Back to the Egg, and I remember it is brutal. So I'm going to just show some of it. I even told Denny Lane about this. I'll explain as we go along. I met Denny Lane a couple of months ago at Fest for Beatles fans, and I mentioned something. It says, Nowhere Man, clipping Paul McCartney's wings. Herewith, a sample of the words from the single Getting Closer. I'm getting closer, my salamander. When will we be there? Oh no, don't answer. Mercifully, no lyric sheet is provided, but a throwaway scrap, what other kind of McCartney lyric is there, from the above tune about a, quote, radio playing a song with a point, sets an ironic tone for the entire LP. A veritable slideshow of dead-end flights of fancy and yesterday's dross. Back to the Egg doesn't contain one cut that's the least bit fleshed out or brought to any logical conclusion. In place of well-framed songs, we get an irritating display of disjointed images and unfocused musical snapshots. Titles are abundant, 14 in all, but the content is largely regurgitant. We're Open Tonight bears a strong resemblance to London Town's I'm Carrying, while Winter Rose Love Awake recalls Power Cut on Red Rose Speedway. After the Ball Million Miles is the obligatory tip of the McCartney hat to English musical hall tradition, but it's vastly inferior to even such half-baked fluff as Venus and Mars, You Gave Me the Answer. The instrumentation on Back to the Egg is so scrambled that any serious criticism would be ridiculous, except to note that the much-heralded rockestra theme, featuring the playing of Pete Townsend, Ronnie Lane, Kenny Jones, John Bonham, Gary Brooker, David Gilmour, John Paul Jones, etc., is a flat affair, cooked up around one hackneyed riff. Wow. Likewise, the runaway bass that made the disco single, Good Night Tonight, absent from the album, a curiosity, is in ample supply here, but not nearly as inventive or powerful. Instead, McCartney just retraces his tired old patterns. Arrow Through Me illustrates why Paul McCartney's output is rarely covered anymore by other artists. At first pleasing to the ear, this love lament soon becomes so flaky that no other performer would dare stand naked with it. Indeed, the only track, this is what I told Denny Lane 2 months ago. Indeed, the only track deserving of special mention is Denny Lane's Again and Again and Again, a somewhat engaging rock segment that could have been built into a comprehensible song. And I was basically telling Denny, this Rolling Stone article praised your song as being one of the only song of any special merit. And he was like, ha ha, he says, you're kidding. He couldn't believe it. He was kind of amused by that. Anyway, the rest of the record sounds like a rude mixture of sub-basement tapes and prose, I can't read it, prose torn at random from the yellow pages. So anyway, this album is nothing more than a slipshod demo by an aimless band. If it had arrived unsolicited in the offices of Columbia, it would have been returned in the next mail with a terse, no thank you. I can think of a few other prominent rock musicians who would have signed their names to this kind of drivel. McCartney's gross indulgence is matched only by his shameless indolence, and Back to the Egg represents the public disintegration of a consistently disappointing talent. This is terrible. Paul McCartney, how does this man sleep? Has been plagiarizing his own material for years now, and he's finally run out of recycled ideas. With a few key word changes, the lyrics that began this piece could end it on an appropriately grim autobiographical note. Where have you gone, Emmett Rhodes? A nation turns its lonely eyes to you. And this utter jackass said, yeah, I'm talking to you. That's right, I said it. Timothy White. Now, I got all of this left here, so we're at 20 minutes now, so we're going to take a break. Join me for part 2.